Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this week. My name is Liz Mangus, Literacy Specialist with Saddleback Educational Publishing. Welcome, welcome, welcome. As you're logging in, please locate your control bar, which is at the bottom of your web browser window. That is where you will find your chat, Q&A, and live transcript options. To take advantage of subtitles today, you'll want to go ahead and click on Live Transcript and then select Show Subtitle. The Q&A area is where you will drop any of your questions, either for Saddleback or for our presenter today. And the chat area is primarily how we will communicate. Just please be sure to select panelists and attendees from the little drop-down menu there before you hit send on your chat. That will ensure that everybody who is participating today can see what it is you have to say. If you don't do that, only a few of us at Saddleback will get your message, and that's just not as much fun. We like the collaborative atmosphere. So please go ahead and select panelists and attendees. The chat area is also where we will be putting links to the resources and handouts for today. And we will be emailing those out to everybody as well after the broadcast, either later today, but more likely tomorrow. So we'll get started in a few minutes. Here is where you can find us on Twitter. We always like to encourage you to follow us on Twitter and say hello. Saddleback is there, as well as our presenter today, Kelly Ryder from English Learner Portal. Hopefully you all know who she is. She's fabulous, and she's got a lot of great information to share with us today. So let's bring her in and say hello. How are you, Kelly?
Hello. Thank you, everybody, for coming in today. I know it's a crazy time of year, so I appreciate you taking a little break and joining us.
Yes, absolutely. I wonder, let's go to the chat. If you could select panelists and attendees, and then let us know where you are joining us from. I see Palm Beach County is here. California is here. All right. Let's see if I can move my chat box down here. It's not cooperating. All right. Okay, Texas, Las Vegas, Colorado, Chicago. Welcome, everybody. And when do you start school? Are you back already? You have a couple more weeks. Are you starting after Labor Day? New York starts on the 30th. Okay. In Long Island anyway. Students on the 30th. All right, Maria on the 16th. It's coming. Allison, you're back already. All right. Yes, we have a local school district here where I am in Texas. Today is their first day for students. And then next week, all the other surrounding districts are starting as well. Yeah, it's here. I can't believe it. I can't believe it's that time already, but here we are. So, well, thank you for joining us. We always are so honored that you take the time to be with us today and just share this professional learning opportunity. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Our topic today is making math accessible for English learners. And we have Kelly Ryder joining us today. She is the founder of English Learner Portal. She'll be telling you a little bit more about herself as she goes throughout her presentation, but I wanted to let you know about English Learner Portal if you're not familiar. So check them out for sure. They are a go-to resource for professional learning, curriculum development, and program consultation focused on the success of English learners. So many great resources, and Kelly will be telling you a little bit about those towards the end of her presentation today. But English Learner Portal, you need to know. You need to know this organization, and you need to know their website. And we're so thrilled that you're here today, Kelly. I'm gonna let you take it from here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Again, I appreciate everyone who's here. From the looks of what we saw, it's happy back to school for most people, and everyone else soon to be following behind. So I am from Maryland, so I saw some Maryland people there, and I know they are going back in a couple of weeks, but I also spent some time in South Carolina, which is where I am right now, and they're going back next week. So lots of fun going on. So I'm just glad that most people are going back in person, and we're going to give this a try, and we'll cross our fingers and hope it works, because we are so ready for more normal. All right, let me introduce myself a little bit before we start talking about math. As Liz said, I'm Kelly Ryder. I'm the founder of English Learner Portal. And I started English Learner Portal in 2018 after 25 or so years in public schools. I started in the school systems as an ESL teacher, moved into being an elementary classroom teacher, kind of went back and forth between those roles depending on what the school needed on any given year. I'm sure you've all done those kinds of things. Moved into doing more professional development, whether it be for technology or ESL or early literacy, a few different professional development roles. Spent a few years as an elementary assistant principal, which I absolutely loved, but then realized it did not exactly match with me having two small children. And so went back to being a district coordinator for an ESL program in a district in Maryland for a while. From there, I had the opportunity to do so much professional development. I started traveling for the WIDA Consortium and doing professional development for them. And then I decided that I was taking a year off from the school system just to give it a try with English Learner Portal. And we've been going ever since. Thankfully, I'm very grateful to the teachers out there who keep supporting us. We are recording this webinar. I see the question pop up, and it will be available via email to you. I think Liz said by tomorrow, so you can keep an eye out for that. So there's my background. What I love about my experience in schools is that I think I've tried a little bit of everything. And so when you ask questions, I hope I can see each thing from your point of view. Today, we have just a short time together, and we're going to talk a little bit about considerations for equity in mathematics education. So we often hear that myth that math is easy for English learners, or math is easier for English learners than the other subjects because math is universal and numbers are universal. And it really is a myth. Math is full of language, especially with the standards now focusing on communicating and critical thinking. So we'll talk a little bit about how we think about equity when it comes to math education for English learners. We'll look at how to systematically address language, just give you a few structures that you can focus on in each lesson plan to make sure that you are also paying attention to language while you are teaching math. And then walk you through just a few very practical strategies, step-by-step of things that we do in the classroom with students that you can take the structure and mimic and make it your own with your grade level content and differentiate to the grade levels of your students. So that's where we are there. If you have any questions along the way, please put them in the chat box. The Saddleback folks are monitoring that. So if I miss it because I'm talking, then they are going to alert me at a certain point and let me know that there are some questions. So feel free to use that option. All right, this may sound pretty nerdy, I'll admit it, but I was very excited when the National Council for Teachers of Mathematics published a position statement on equity in mathematics education for English learners. It was like someone finally recognizing that you were in the room, right? It had been so long that we've been talking about language in science, language in math, language in social studies, and we have English language development standards in all those content areas. But yet there wasn't any official recognition from the math camp. And so when this position came out from the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, I was very excited to have something that I could go to my math teams, my math groups, my math experts and say, let's use this as a place to start. So I'm going to be quiet for 2 minutes and let you read this position statement. While you're reading, think about a few key words that jump out at you and put those in the chat box. What key words jump out at you? All right, thank you for your responses. I love seeing what you're thinking. Right, just about another minute to read and add to the chat those keywords that jump out at you. All right, feel free to keep adding. Just for time's sake, we want to make sure that we keep the content moving, but thank you so much for your thoughts. You see that a lot of your colleagues have the same kinds of ideas of what stood out to them. So, and you'll see that many of them match the ones that stood out to me. So what we're really talking about in this webinar and the work that English Learner Portal does around the language of math is really being responsive. So we can't just give you, 3 strategies and say, this is what you need to do with your English learners. Or we can't write one curriculum that fits everyone. Right? It really is about knowing your students and being responsive to their needs as people, to their language needs, to their math needs, which we know are always changing. I also felt that this part here, acknowledging and addressing factors that contribute to differential outcomes. So this opens it up for the conversation to say, why do some of our students do better than others? We have some English learners who do fabulous in math, despite the language barrier. We have English learners who do not. We have English speakers who do well and English speakers who do not. But it's taking the time to figure out what is it for that student that's making it work or not work, and how we can build on that. Whoops, flipped out of there too quickly. So when you think about all of that, I am going to use this webinar to help you think about the big things, the big ideas for any math lesson that you can keep in mind that will help you to be responsive and to think about the different factors that might be coming into play so that you can assure access. Access is our big thing. Students having access to their materials and their instruction. And what can you do as their teachers to support that and make that access even stronger for them? So in the chat, again, since y'all are very good at participating in the chat there, what do you consider to be the biggest obstacles for English learners in math instruction in your experience or in your area? What obstacles do you see? Word problems. I remember in elementary school as a native English speaker not loving word problems. Background knowledge, word problems. When you combine that background knowledge and word problems, you get compounding issues, because background knowledge, not only in the math, but background knowledge in whatever the scenario is, Even though you don't really need to know all the details of what's happening in a word problem, it certainly helps you to feel more confident and comfortable, which also brings in that vocabulary, right? We need to know what those words are. Math phobia, absolutely. Students learn quickly where their comfort zone is. Right. And there are, I see a couple comments mentioning it, there are cultural differences. We found this great video in one of our language of math courses that goes through Mayan schools from Guatemala, from rural Guatemala, and that they use a totally different numbering system. So when those students enter US schools, it isn't that the numbers are universal and math is universal. They do things very differently in that language and culture. So we do talk about that a lot in the work that we do. Teachers who aren't engaging our beginning English speakers because it's uncomfortable. They don't know how, they don't want to embarrass them, they don't want to make them uncomfortable. And what we end up doing is excusing them from learning. So we don't want that to happen. So I would agree, right? Arabic has different numbering system as well. Lots of things to take into consideration. So hopefully some of what we talk about today will address some of those challenges and you can see where they fit together with what you know. The first thing that we share with teachers when we work together, whether it be in a face-to-face workshop or in our online courses, we start with the simple accessibility pieces, the simple scaffolds that teachers are already familiar with and are using. And then we talk about how to tweak those and make them even stronger for our students to have more accessibility to the math. One of our favorite places to start with teachers are the 3 principles of accessible lesson planning. So in ESL, for some reason, things come in 3s, which you'll see through this presentation. But the 3 principles of accessible lesson planning are quite simple, yet very powerful, that when you keep these ideas in mind as you plan lessons, you will see a big difference in the engagement and the willingness of your students to try and get involved. So the first principle, interaction. And I would say interaction is the closest thing that language and math teachers can have to the silver bullet, the magic wand that's going to solve our problems. Now, of course, it's never that simple, but interaction really is that powerful. So our teachers, for the most part, are already doing a lot of things in their classrooms that focus on interaction, right? We have a lot of strategies for this. We use think, pair, share, turn and talk, small group work, collaboration, partner work, right? All of those things are happening in most of our classrooms, and they're very positive strategies and very effective strategies. So what I challenge you to think about then is that next step where, as it says here on the screen, our students must use the language to learn the language. So if you took a foreign language class, or same thing, students must use the math to learn the math, right? We have to practice. So are we giving our students enough opportunity, enough time day to day to really practice their math language and their math concepts, because those will go together, right? We have to have a context in which to speak. And so are we getting ample time for our students to really practice what they are learning? So when it comes to planning your lessons, keeping this triangle in the front of your mind, the front of your plan book, and asking yourself in every lesson all day long, if you're elementary and you teach multiple subjects, same is true whether it's science, social studies, language arts, PE, art, music, whatever it may be. Where do I provide opportunities for interaction for my students? And how can I increase that time as much as possible so we have more student talk and then less teacher talk. That day to day depends because the teacher has to have a voice and be engaged. But asking yourself in every lesson, where am I allowing students to interact? And how much time am I giving them to do that? Because they need the time for that practice. So a couple examples of this, a very easy place to start because most teachers do some of these things naturally. And so when we talk about it, a lot of people will say, I do that, I do that. It's like, perfect. Now let's move from I do that to I purposefully do this all the time so that my students are developing language and math simultaneously. And these ideas have a lot of different names over time. You know, in education, we like to name things and then rename them and reinvent them and bring them out again as something else. But I originally learned about these strategies in this book that's here, Suzanne Chapin, and Talk Moves. Wonderful book as well if you want to get into lots of examples and some videos and things like that. But the Talk Moves pretty much are a way to start with teachers and then later for your students to use them as you teach them how to use them in getting deeper in the conversation. So we're trying to, in that interaction, make it more quality interaction as well, more time and more quality. So what are you doing as a teacher to dig a little bit more, get a little bit more from your students, pull that language and math out of them? So we go through and we practice different talk moves. So while we're discussing whatever we're working on in math, you know, we're talking about which fraction is greater. The first talk move, revoicing. So with English learners, with most students, repetition is a very valuable tool. You just hear it over and over. We start to learn that language pattern, cement the language, cement the concepts in our mind as well as we talk about them. So one way to get that repetition is using revoicing. So if someone says, you know, fraction A is greater than fraction B, oh, so you're saying that fraction B is less than, so you might put a little twist on it. Do I have that right? Revoicing is also useful when you have a student whose English isn't perfectly clear, or it may have come out a little jumbled, and you can use revoicing to take their idea and model it back to them in a more correct version. So you might get a jumbled, you know, choppy response that's not really a sentence, and you'll say, oh, okay, I see. So you're saying that, and then you model what it sounds like in a fluent way, and you validated your students' thought, and you explained to them, showed them, modeled for them how to say what they wanted to say in more complete English. So serves a lot of purposes there. Again, like I said, repetition is key in any content area, and especially in developing the language as well. So once a student gives an answer, or once I give an answer or a response, then we can add to that and say, can you restate or rephrase what Ms. Ryder just said? Who can say that in another way? So it allows students to hear different versions of the same, helps students understand that there's not just one way of doing things, gives students various levels of proficiency for language models. So much value there. And I see, just quickly glancing at the chat, can you use sentence stems for this? Absolutely. And we'll get a little bit more into that in a minute, but absolutely, the more structures we put in place to guide our students in their interaction, the more valuable it will be, right? You can spend 5 minutes in interaction and it can have some impact, sorry about that, minimal impact, or it can have really significant impact if you support it and scaffold it, which we'll get to. In the reasoning section, agree or disagree and why. So Judith says, this fraction A is greater than fraction B. Do you agree or disagree? This gets into critical thinking. Again, students are using the vocabulary of the topic, and they're also learning the language of agreeing and disagreeing. And for this, we often do have anchor charts or sentence stems or references to say, what does it sound like when we agree? And what does it sound like when we politely disagree? And you can give some frames and some variety to how students can do that together. Adding on is always that valuable adding on to get deeper into higher level language, or adding on to get deeper into the math concept. But either way, whichever way the student goes with it, very valuable. Would someone like to add on to that? Could you add on to what Tayaba said? Could you add on to my explanation? What did I miss? Was there something else I could have said? Wait time. Wait time, there's so much research around about the value of wait time, and it's particularly important for English learners because of the amount of processing that's going on in here. So I'm taking it in English, I'm thinking about what that is in my native language. I'm trying to remember what we talked about in math yesterday. I might be thinking about that in English or my native language, and then I have to think about what I'm going to say, and I have to get the words together and get them back out. That's a lot going on in there. So providing wait time allows for more students to participate and have their voices heard. Turn and talk, we talked about a little bit, always a great strategy. And we will talk about how to make those turn and talks or think pair shares, like just, raise the bar a little bit and structure them some. So thinking about, again, another place you can use frames. When you turn to your partner, I like to use the directions I give to my students to include the language I want them to use. So I include the math expectation and the language expectation in my directions to students. And it might sound something like, we are going to talk about which fraction is greater, A or B. When you turn to your partner, partner A is going to share their thoughts first. Partner B, you may agree or disagree. What does it sound like when you agree with someone's idea? What might it sound like when you disagree? Do a little modeling. When you talk about your fractions, I should hear things like numerator, denominator. I should hear greater than or less than. I should hear parts of a whole. Things like that, all those fraction words, I should be hearing that when you're talking to your partner. And then what I often do is listen in as they're doing their turn and talk and jot down, or if I can remember, I have to write it down. I can't remember by the time we come back together, some examples of what I heard. I really love when Liz said, and then give an example that's great math and great language. So some ideas of how to take what you already do and just enhance it a little bit and focus in not just on getting the right math answer, but getting some great thinking and conversation about that math at the same time. Another idea that we use for interaction, we use this in every content area, probably more in small group reading and language arts and math than anything. But we got this idea from Jeff Swears, who has done a ton of work around interaction and academic discourse, academic language in the math classroom in particular. And he has has different strategies for building on or adding on. And what we often do in small groups or partners is give students a Lego each time they add to the conversation. So if your students are in table groups and I say, you know, what do you think about this? Someone gives an answer, they get a Lego. Can someone add on? They get a Lego. You know, this is great also when you're at a table with a small group. We use it a lot in guided reading as well for students to participate. And then they get the little bonus at the end of, okay, now you can build something, put your Legos together and build something to share with us. We also use it to show adding on, you know, add another detail. So students might each have a little baggie of Legos, and as they add details to their responses, whether oral or written, they can create their own structure and add on. So we really focus on that adding on feature. There are a lot of Legos floating around every room that we work with. Our next principle is comprehensibility. And so this is hitting on some of the things I've seen as I glance at the chat, some things that have popped up about how you can make your content more comprehensible. So there aren't many teachers nowadays who are just stand and deliver and oral language only, no supports whatsoever. I won't say they don't exist, but thankfully there aren't too many of those left out there. So how can we take what we already do, like what's on the screen here, visuals, manipulatives, gestures, organizers, using multimedia? We're already doing those things. So what's that next step? What's that plus one? What's that upgrade we can do when it comes to comprehensibility? Pardon me. And it comes back to what we said in the beginning. It's that you're thinking about it in the planning and not just on the fly. You're thinking about who's in front of you and who needs how much support. You're thinking about where are the difficult concepts and how might I use some pictures or labels or a quick video or modeling to support that concept. What is best, and I love that Robert just popped sensory support right back up there as I was thinking about it, but how can we hit multiple senses with everything we do? And again, it's one of those rules of three in linguistics of when something is really important, let's say a new vocabulary word, if we're saying denominator, I'm going to say denominator, so we have the spoken word. I'm going to write denominator, and if you write it while you're talking, it's even more powerful. If you have it already written and you point to it, still good, but that watching the motion for some reason works with the brain to help remember things better. If they're writing it, even better. Writing denominator. So I say it, I see the word, and then a visual. So I might do like 1/2 and put an arrow pointing to the 2, and we talk a little bit about it. So anything that's really critical, you want to have 3 ways that students are taking it in. A visual way, an auditory way, and then again, it's visual and auditory together, but the text, because we're always working on literacy, right? Lots of ideas there. So big idea, planning for it. How can I make my lesson more comprehensible? What are the big ideas I really need to support? What am I going to do to make sure I'm hitting on that kind of rule of 3s to get myself in that habit? Once you get in the habit, you notice yourself doing it all the time, to the point where my children will say, Mom, you know, we get it. Just one way is good for us. And I'll be like, you know, gestures, and we've got it. It becomes a habit, just like giving all the language expectations in your directions becomes a habit. Every time I give a direction, I just automatically say, and what I should hear is, or what I should see is, right? Great things to add to your directions. After comprehensibility, our ideas around that, anchor charts, great tool for comprehensibility. And when we do language of math workshops with teachers, both online and face-to-face, we spend some good time on anchor charts because there are so many things you can do with it. And so think about what we've already said. There's a visual, there are labels, we have the numbers. Hopefully we've built this anchor chart together. An anchor chart that comes already finished is a good tool. The upgrade to that is an anchor chart we built together while we're talking about this, because they will remember why you picked up the green marker. They will remember what you said when you wrote midpoint. If I just look at a pre-made anchor chart and I see midpoint, I may or may not be able to read that word or figure it out or decode it. But if I am listening to my teacher say midpoint and write midpoint and show me a midpoint, rule of threes, I'm very likely to remember what that means and can use this chart as a reference. So going back to what we said about our sentence frames, we want to also give our students support, not just about the concept. The top of this anchor chart, supports the concepts and the processes, but about the language that goes with it. So when I say, when you talk about rounding this number, I should hear things like, any number at or above the midpoint, you do what? I should hear things like round up, round down, midpoint, the number, at or above, below. And then you can have some of those frames there and model and have them available so that students don't have to come up with that all on their own. They can really focus on the math and not have to worry so much about what words they're putting together because you've helped them do that. So another support in there for both interaction and comprehensibility, really. Our next area of rule of threes and thinking about those anchor charts, right? We use this image a lot at English Learner Portal. This is how our language and concepts flow, right? We start on a solid foundation of word knowledge. So when we start something new, we always introduce the key vocabulary. We're expecting students to use the vocabulary. I just saw a content go by. Let me see. Let me grab a different context because I've used fractions 100 times. Okay. All right, if you're talking about conservation of momentum, okay, I'm not going to give too many examples because I'll show how long it's been since I had that class. But let's say you're talking about that. There's clearly key vocabulary that goes with it. You start with that solid foundation of word knowledge. Then when you move up into the pillars here, right, we have the purposes for language. What are we talking about? Why are we talking about it? How are we going to talk about it? Who are we going to talk to? So we need some structures there. We want to work on the types of sentences and the sentence complexity that our students are using. So we can use a sentence frame, but really think about, like, here's the upgrade I want you to think about. We use sentence frames, sentence starters all the time. The upgrade is looking at those grammatical structures, types of sentences, and sentence complexity that's on the screen there. When you create your sentence frames or you create your anchor chart, you are saying this is how we talk about or write about this concept. Your model will determine the language that students use. Some will go down a little bit, some will naturally be talkative and verbal and take it up a notch. But really think about that. Where are your students in their English proficiency? And if they're beginners, you want to make sure you're getting complete sentences. They can be more simple sentences. You might try to stretch the length of the sentence a little bit with a because or as a result, something like that. If you have more intermediate or higher level students, when you create your sentence frame, think about that. How can you model more complexity? How can you vary the types of sentences you use? How can you try some different grammatical structures? You don't necessarily become the language teacher, but within your modeling, you are showing students how to use a higher level of language. And when you talk to your partner, I would like to hear you using these sentence frames to begin, And then once you talk about this, you can go on and add whatever you like. You just raise the bar to say, we're going to have a much more academic conversation because my frame is leading the way. So think about that upgrade with your sentence frames. And then once we have that foundation of word knowledge, and we think about how our students are going to put that knowledge into sentences and use that vocabulary, then we are easing our way into some academic discourse. And again, it comes back to opportunity. We want to get beyond the turn and talk, right? Turn and talk, think, pair, share, awesome strategies. We've already talked about ways to upgrade them as well. But think about when in your lesson you can give a little bit of time for extended conversation, not just a partner A, partner B, partner A, partner B. Okay, come back to the whole group. Very valuable. But where in your lesson do you give time for students to take all of that practice, all of those resources, and put it together and have a real conversation about your topic? It might be through problem solving. It might be a conversation where you put talk moves in front of them, or you put the Legos in front of them, and you say, between you and your partner, you're going to go A, B, A, B, A, B. I'm setting the timer for 2 minutes, and you cannot stop talking about fractions until that 2 minutes is up. 2 minutes is a long time. And that's kind of simple practice. As students get more confident, as you get deeper into a unit, then you can give prompts that really turn into academic discourse. What's your opinion? Justify your opinion, agree or disagree. And we'll talk about that a little more as well. So ways to really beef up the language while you're still focused on math or whatever your content area is the entire time. So here's a couple ideas. Again, the text, the image, and then hopefully this first anchor chart was built with the teacher using the oral language at the same time. So this anchor chart shows what potentially could have been a great example of that rule of 3. There are keywords. There are, for comprehensibility, you have the images, you have the line of symmetry shown there, and there's a quick frame at the bottom. This shape has blank lines of symmetry because. So that's a great turn and talk prompt, a great think, pair, share prompt. So that'll get us started. And then we can move into a little bit more discourse with our next chart. These figures are blank because symmetrical, not symmetrical. They are also, they are not. The figure is. So you can have a variety of frames and say, you can use any of these or ideas of your own when you go off and have this conversation about symmetry, and you give them a good prompt to talk about. But again, you're giving them the language to get started so they can focus more on the concepts and less on trying to pull all those ideas and language together from outer space. These are very intermediate level frames. We have beginnings of complexity. We have a because. So what I would suggest to this teacher is if you have native English speakers or you have higher proficiency student, like higher intermediates or intermediates, what could I add in there to make the sentences that I'm modeling for students a little bit more complex? So think about that for a minute, because that's where we get stuck. And I'd love if anybody has a suggestion or an idea or something you can throw out there as an upgrade. Looking at these sentence starters on the right, how could you upgrade these models a little bit to push toward those upper proficiency levels? Your students putting this sentence together pretty easily. What can I do to push their thinking and their language up a little bit more while they're talking about symmetry? So could this be part of an exit slip? Absolutely. All right, good. We have an example popping up in here. So you might talk about comparing and contrasting. That brings in some more complicated language. I like it. So different grammar ideas, the difference between these, they, this, it, that, right? You might want to mix that up a little bit. You might want to specify a little bit more about the academic vocabulary and require that. So nice. I think I see that you're getting those ideas. So always be thinking, you know, I want to stay just a step above my students when it comes to language and literacy and math. If my students are comfortable here, that's wonderful. We really learn the math, we get the math. But then if we want to really challenge their thinking and their language, how can I bump it up just a little bit and get them moving a little higher? Which leads us into, I've said critical thinking many, many times through this, but we really want to make sure that we do keep our students focused on the critical thinking. And this really comes into play when we're talking about beginning English speakers and newcomers. We tend to, that sympathy kicks in for us first, and we tend to water things down or excuse students. And we really want to make sure that our English learners, regardless of their English proficiency level, still have opportunities to build their critical thinking skills and express their thinking. So what we always say in our trainings is that you want to focus students on the grade level and age appropriate standards. So, and we're going to do that through providing all these supports we talked about. We're providing visuals, we're providing videos, we're doing all kinds of things to make sure they can access that grade level standard. When it comes to how they're interacting, it might sound different for a beginning English speaker. I might just have them point to the greater fraction and name the fraction. That might be as much as I can get out of the student who just walked in the door yesterday. If I can get that, it's been a good day in math, right? But then we don't stay there. Then we want them to start putting that in a sentence as soon as they're comfortable. Blank is the greater fraction, whatever you want it to be. Blank is greater than blank. Really working on the language part. Never staying too long in one place with one model, because once they get it, put in another one, put in a higher one. So here are, let's get into a different kind of, those are general strategies. I want to walk you through a process that I love from Jeff Swears. If you take any courses with us, you'll know that we love everything Jeff Swears, Z-W-I-E-R-S. And you can look at jeffswears.org. He has lots of videos of strategies in place focused on academic discourse and critical thinking. I guarantee you'll love. He has lots of protocols there, and this is one of the protocols. So we're talking about a unit rate problem and real life example. We see these all the time in the classroom. 96 loads of laundry for $21.44 or 60 loads of laundry for $9.89. What's the better deal? Insert any problem solving scenario. It might be science. It might be a social studies scenario. It might be a slope problem. It might be simple addition. You can make it whatever problem you want. The protocol or the process is the key here because it's got language and thinking embedded. So again, remember, we're going to work through these levels as we do our work together. So real life unit rates. We've done some instruction. We created an anchor chart. We did step-by-step little visuals, explanations, talked you through, you know, we're ready now for some independent practice. What key vocabulary, okay, we're starting at the bottom of that structure. What key vocabulary will students need to comprehend a unit rate problem? So when we're planning, we're going to use this, this little temple looking structure here, and we're going to work our way up. We're starting with the foundation. This is our planning guide. What vocabulary will they need? Make yourself a list, and you make sure that you are using the rule of threes to introduce that vocabulary, and that you are using the vocabulary over and over and over, and you're saying that magic sentence of when you are answering a question or when you are talking to your neighbor, I want to hear And here's the beginning of your anchor chart, because here's all the key vocabulary that makes your teacher happy. Right? Then we move into, we need to think about the kinds of sentences students will need to participate. So we're going to talk about step by step. We're going to talk about fractions as a part of this. We're going to be dividing, like there's a lot going on here. So what sentence structures and language will students need to explain the process? We probably have students who can solve this, but they can't necessarily tell you why or how because their language isn't quite there. So how can we set them up for success? So on our anchor chart, we want to use that as a way to model, think aloud, and then we build the supports. So again, this would look much prettier as a real anchor chart, but when you make one in PowerPoint, you can only make it so fancy here. I know. All right, so at the top of my anchor chart, I have the key vocabulary. I would definitely add in visuals if I have anyone below an intermediate English speaker or below, jazz it up, put the visuals in there. And then I'm going to do my think aloud and I'm going to model what that looks like and sounds like. So I'm thinking, what language pieces could I put in here also and like kill two birds with one stone, right? More bang for your buck. I want to work on getting my students to use the vocabulary and to make more complex sentences. So I want to focus on using really academic sounding language to do this. To find the unit rate of tide, first I, and then you see numerator, denominator, da, da, da. Now I could have just put, first I put the, but just try to keep in the front of your mind, how can I beef this up a little? Because students are going to use my model and it will help build their language and make them sound a lot smarter in math at the same time. So we have sequencing in here as well. So you can think about what are different ways to express sequence. So I have first, then last. There's a lot of other ways you can do that. So mix it up. If you're doing sequencing, then think of other words that you can use to sequence as well. I may start with my lower intermediate students of giving them frames something like this, where I've already modeled, or I give them a partial model and they can help fill it in. So these are different levels, different ways of differentiating the same task, right? And have them start putting these together. You may give even less structure if there are higher proficiency levels. So now once we start solving a problem, I'll turn it over to my students. Now that you have a frame, you know the vocabulary, you know how to express step by step what you're doing, now go back to that detergent, and I want you can do it individually or with your partners, however you work it in your classroom. You should now go solve. And I want you to write an explanation that is similar to mine. Depending on their levels, you may need more supports or partners. You might do teacher with a small group and you have the pen, lots of ways to differentiate that. And then we walk through Jeff Swear's math paired conversation protocol. And we do this step by step. And the steps are in a particular order for a particular reason. And there's been a lot of research behind it through Stanford University of how the thinking and language builds step by step. So you want to keep the steps in the same order. I wouldn't necessarily use the handout. This is the official Jeff Swear's handout. I often modify it so it's not so busy with text and it focuses a little bit more on the math. But here are the steps. So first thing we do when they get with their partners, okay, before you dive into the math, like there's no pencils, we're not doing math right now. Paraphrase and clarify the problem. Talk to each other. What does that problem say? What is it asking? Is there anything you don't understand? Do you have any questions? Do not start solving. You have to say that like 500 times. Then, again, no pencils. Estimate your answer, right? So just start thinking, just get the math juices flowing, right? Estimate your answer. Don't tell each other yet. You're like, okay, partner A, tell partner B, what's your estimate and why? And partner B, tell partner A, what's your estimate and why? We don't want to hear any agree or disagree yet. We're just sharing information. All right. Partner A is going to talk about what? Then we're going to go ahead and solve the problem at this point. I almost missed a step there. Individually solve your problem. If it's still in the beginning of a unit and kind of hard, then partners can work together to solve, and then they'll do like 2s to 4s, where these 2 students are solving the problem together, these 2 students are solving the problem together, and then these become partner A and these become partner B, and they come together. So you can do 1 and 1 to 2, 2 and 2 to 4, something like that. So individually, your partners, you solve it, and then you need to draw, write, whatever it is you have to do to show your work. Then you're going to have a conversation about it. So partner A is going to explain the method they use to solve this problem, and they're going to justify why they did that. Now, you may need to take some time here and talk about, what does that sound like? What will it sound like when I explain my method? And what will it sound like when I justify why? And you might need a little anchor chart just for that. Never assume that the students have the language to do what you're about to tell them to do. Always think, how can I give them the language first so that we can think about the math and not worry so much about the language? Then partner B is going to explain their method and justify their method. So again, you can use visuals, drawings, charts, whatever they need to do to show what they're thinking. They compare what they did, they have a conversation, they talk about it. Now we want to get into some more critical thinking. So in your group, discuss which method you would recommend. And here's where we have to build some community, because we're going to say one of these methods is better than the other. You both may have the right answer. You might have 2 wrong answers. You might have a right answer and a wrong answer. But which method do you think was the best way to approach it, and why? And you really have to work on that a little and think about, was it most efficient, less steps? Was it fastest? Was it the most correct? Lots of things that you could have lead them toward. Again, some frames will be helpful there as well. When you are discussing which method is you would recommend, I should hear things like better, faster, efficient, accurate, simple, complex, like whatever it is you want them to target. Then you want students, okay, now with your group, I want you to talk about what was similar between the 2 methods. Like, did you both divide? Did one use repeated addition and the other partner use repeated addition? What did you do that was the same? Maybe the only thing you did that was the same was take the prices and the ounces, right? That could be it, right? So then they want to talk about how they're different. And then you're going to pick one method and you're going to generate a really solid explanation for, this is how we recommend you solve a unit rate problem like this. And we've talked about all the pros and cons, and we've come up with one idea, and this is how we're going to make that happen. Later, if there's time, students can then create a similar problem. That might be your exit ticket. That might be something then you use those exit tickets to have a similar paired conversation protocol happen the next day. But I saw fly by in the chat very quickly about the Jeff Sweers website. It's JEFFZWIERS, jeffsweers.com. And there's a link there that says protocols, lots of protocols, like protocols of how to discuss a text, School Reform Initiative, SRI, School Reform Initiative, is also a group, a website that has a lot of protocols for interaction and academic discussion. Thank you, Shannon, for putting that in there. School Reform Initiative, check them out as well. They go into all content areas. SWEAR sticks mostly with math, but has lots of supports there as well. So these are the kinds of activities that really support incorporating the triangle, the 3 principles. It incorporates those 3 levels of word, sentence structure, academic discourse, hits on all of those. And it really turns the majority of the class time into student talk versus teacher talk. Now, you know, it takes practice and modeling and time. But I've seen wonderful things and students who become so sophisticated and serious about their discussions in math that you think like, this is very, very cool. Like when you can step back and just listen to it happen. And then for our beginners and our newcomers, sometimes I pull them to a small group with me, and while other students are doing theirs independently, I'm modeling and walking them through step by step and helping with the communication, but we're doing the same thing. Or we have a modified recording sheet, other ways that they can use it, and we just have a little less sophisticated communication going on, but there's still communication going on. All kinds of differentiation possibilities there. So again, one of our models, we might just be focusing on the sequencing. We give some sentence starters, different levels, different ideas. So we're coming to the end of our time, and I just wanted to let you know that here's like a bunch of different URLs for you. But EnglishLearnerPortal.com is our website where you can find recorded webinars that we've done in the past. You can find resources, you can find our courses. Most related to this webinar is our Language of Math pathway, where we start in the first course of really talking about the 3 principles and the triangle, and lots of ideas of how you can incorporate that. Thinking and Speaking in Math, we get deeper into that critical thinking and interaction and incorporate more Jeff Swear's ideas in there as well. And then Advanced Strategies, we get into more sophisticated academic discourse. And then also bringing in that culture, like we talked about the Mayan culture in math and how culture influences math. So I've said a million things. I hope you'll check out what we have to offer, and we'll see you again. If you have any questions, I believe, let me check. I'll put it in the chat box for my email, and you have the website. So thank you so much for your time. I know time is short right now, and thank you so much for everything you do for your students. You obviously care. And I hope you have a wonderful start to your school year, and I pray for much smoother than last. So good luck to you all.
Thank you. We have time to take maybe one question, and then other questions that come in, we'll make sure that we get you your answers for sure. But before we dive into those questions, I just wanted to let everybody know that next week we have Susan Patterson returning for our webinar, and her session is going to be supporting high school newcomers on the first day and beyond. So if you know Susan, she's been on the webinar series before, she is a teacher. This is a great sort of nuts and bolts strategy for things we can do in the first couple of days to set the tone and help our newcomers in high school feel more comfortable and get acclimated. So very practical, and coming from someone who is like all of us, doing the work and looking for the best ways to help serve our students. So please join us next week, and you can register on our website, or you should be receiving an email prompting you to register shortly. So that's what's coming up next week. Also, a quick reminder that our new Go ELL literacy library, this is our tween literacy library, is available. These ones are organized into content area genres, including math, since we were talking about math today. A few books in there on math that are written at very accessible levels and include some great rich math vocabulary. So check that out as well. All right, let's jump into these questions. Judith had a question about how often you use this Zweer's protocol for math problems. Do you choose just key problems that lead to an understanding of the process, or do you do that rather than all the problems, or how do you handle that? What's your recommendation?
For this protocol, the shared partner protocol, it comes more toward the end of a unit because they really need to understand all of those problem solving pieces before, so they can do this independently. So it's coming toward where you're going to do some assessing. So once, twice during a particular unit in math, I would think is going to give you a really good wrap up and an summary of where they are. Great formative assessment also to listen in. And we spend a long period of time with just one problem. So I would pick one key problem. We're talking about unit rate. We only have one example, and this could be your 45-minute math block right there easily that we spent on one problem. But we justify that by all the critical thinking and processing that's going on. And then maybe the next day, we can use the same process and apply it to a second problem and see if they get more efficient with it. Then I would probably leave it at that and move back into our regular math structures and other interaction strategies. But definitely the culmination of when we talk about discourse and letting students hold the floor, this is a perfect example of that. So by the end of a unit, they should be really ready.
And would you shorten the process for newcomers, maybe chunk it out a little bit more?
I wouldn't take out any steps, but we would definitely take a longer time because each of those critical thinking steps is really important. So it would be a lot more teacher-led, I think, just because the communication is going to need a lot more support. I would definitely have a different visual handout with more icons and more visuals to show what step we're on, much more teacher modeling. Same process, but with a lot more support.
Great. And then we had a question here from Robert about some of the higher level math, algebra, trigonometry, that sort of thing. I would guess that this protocol could work no matter the content, the specific math area, so to speak. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of address that, because obviously the more complicated the math, the more, I guess, difficult it seems to convey that content to an English learner.
Right. So we can't take away the fact that teaching complex content to students who, especially beginning English learners, is quite difficult, not because they don't have the brain power, but just because expressing complex concepts and breaking them down takes a while. It's difficult and it gets very cumbersome. I've seen this. I've been doing some assessment work with a district in their high school science and high school social studies. And just the simplest 2 words on a page is such a complex concept. So that's where you get more bogged down. You can use the protocols for any problem. I mean, it might be, what kind of curve. It might be, the most efficient way to solve for slope. It might be, I can't give you one from calculus. My brain didn't go that far. I did a lot of algebra co-teaching, systems of equations. You could use all of that, but it is true that the ideas get more complex and it is hard for beginners to do. Not impossible, but you're really going to have to take the time to break it down into tinier steps to really get them engaged.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and thank you for your engagement today. This is a lot of action in the chat, a lot of great questions that we sort of tackled as they came in. But this was fantastic. Thank you so much, Kelly, for agreeing to share this session with us. Reach out to us on social media. We love to hear from you, and thank you for all that you do, and have a great school year. We'll be here. We'll try to be here every week with webinars. I don't know how that's going to look, but we're going to continue to work to bring you this great content. So thank you so much, Kelly. Thank you everybody for joining, and we will see you next week.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.